The 21-year-old alien royal insulted the human, so he turned and walked away without a word. The Great Hall of the Interstellar Concord was built to impress. Its ceiling curved like the inside of a giant shell, glowing softly with light that shifted colors depending on who was speaking. Flags from hundreds of worlds floated in the air, held up by gentle gravity fields. Each flag represented a species that had survived long enough to matter. Humanity's flag was there too. It was small, plain, blue and white, easy to miss. The humans had been invited only recently after decades of slow observation. They were not members yet, not real ones. They were listed as observers, allowed to attend, listen, and speak only when spoken to. Most species believed this was generous enough. Near the outer ring of the hall sat the human delegate. His name was Elias Mercer. He did not wear medals or royal markings. His clothes were neat, dark, and simple. He carried no visible weapons, no assistants, no symbols of power. Most delegates forgot he was even there. Across the hall stood Prince Kaler of the Virelian Star Dominion. At only 21 cycles old, he was already considered important. He was tall, silver-skinned, and dressed in layers of glowing fabric that shifted with his mood. He had been raised among tutors, praised for his sharp mind and flawless memory. He had never been ignored in his life. Today, he was bored. The discussions dragged on about trade lanes, shared research rules, and energy quotas. Older diplomats spoke carefully, choosing words that caused no offense. Kaler listened for a while, then stopped pretending. When the topic turned to cooperation with newer species, his attention returned. "The conquered," Kaler said, his voice smooth and confident, "must be careful about elevating species that mistake speed for wisdom." Several delegates turned toward him. The room quieted slightly. "Some civilizations," he continued, glancing in the human direction, "survive by reacting loudly to every problem. They move fast, speak fast, and call it intelligence. But survival is not the same as understanding." A few soft sounds of agreement moved through the hall. Elias Mercer looked up. Kaler smiled faintly. "Noise is not thought. Urgency is not discipline. A species that has existed for such a short time cannot possibly understand patience, silence, or long vision." This time, the meaning was clear. All eyes turned to the human. According to protocol, Elias should respond. He could defend humanity, explain their history, point to their achievements. The conquered allowed it. Some species even expected it. Elias did not do any of that. He remained still for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood up slowly, calmly. He inclined his head once not toward Kaler, but toward the chamber itself. Then he turned and walked away. No words, no protest, no anger, just quiet footsteps fading into the hall's outer passage. The reaction was immediate, though subtle. Some delegates exchanged confused looks. Others felt mild embarrassment, the kind that comes from watching someone lose without a fight. A few felt second-hand shame for the human. Kaler blinked. He had expected resistance. Maybe a clever reply, maybe a passionate defense. Humans were known for emotional reactions, after all. This was nothing. "Well," Kaler said lightly, breaking the silence, "I believe that proves my point." Soft laughter followed, polite and careful. The session continued, but something had shifted. Within the next hour, 3 scheduled meetings were quietly canceled. No announcement was made. The notices simply disappeared from the shared system. At first, no one noticed. Later that day, a senior trade analyst from the Nethri Collective frowned at her display. A projection model she had relied on for years was no longer updating correctly. Certain variables were missing. She requested assistance. The reply came back automated and polite. Human consultants unavailable. She assumed it was an error. Elsewhere, a logistics council delayed a vote when their timing simulations failed to align. A cultural exchange committee postponed a decision because translation nuances were suddenly unclear. Small things, annoying things, nothing alarming. Yet. Prince Kaler spent the evening celebrating his successful appearance. Older nobles congratulated him on establishing tone. Advisors told him it was wise to remind younger species of their place. Kaler agreed. Still, when he returned to his private quarters, the image of the human walking away stayed with him longer than he expected. There had been no fear in that movement, no shame, just choice. The next cycle, Kaler attended a strategic briefing. His empire was negotiating a multi-system energy agreement that required precise coordination between 3 different species, each with their own laws and calendars. The projections were off. "Why is this confidence range so wide?" Kaler asked. An aide hesitated. "We are missing several adaptive models, Your Highness. Previously, the human advisory team helped align these frameworks." Kaler frowned. "Why are they not present?" "They withdrew from non-essential consultations." "Non-essential?" Kaler repeated. The aide did not answer. Across the Concord, similar questions were being asked. No alarms sounded, no systems failed, but everything felt slightly heavier, slightly slower, like a machine running without oil. Senior diplomats began to notice patterns. Humans were still present physically, still polite, still responsive when directly addressed. But they no longer offered suggestions unprompted. They no longer filled gaps. They no longer stayed late to help others understand complex overlaps. They had not broken any rules. They had simply stopped trying. Elias Mercer spent his days reviewing data quietly in the human delegation space. When contacted, he responded with clarity and professionalism. When asked why certain cooperative initiatives had paused, he explained that resources had been reassigned internally. No bitterness, no blame, just facts. One elder diplomat from the Talarin Union finally asked him directly, "Did something happen at the last assembly?" Elias considered the question. "Something was clarified," he said. "That was all." Prince Kaler requested a private report on human influence within the Concord. The results surprised him. Humans were not listed as leaders of any major initiative. They held no executive authority. Yet their involvement appeared everywhere, threaded quietly through agreements, translations, schedules, and risk assessments. They were not commanders, they were connectors. Kaler felt an unfamiliar sensation tighten in his chest. He had not defeated the human. He had dismissed him, and the human had responded by showing him exactly how much that mattered. By the end of the cycle, the Conquered delayed its vote on humanity's status upgrade. Not because of doubt, but because too many supporting systems were suddenly unclear. The irony went unnoticed by most. Prince Kaler stood once more in the Great Hall, watching delegates argue over details that once resolved themselves smoothly. For the first time, the silence felt loud. And somewhere beyond the chamber, Elias Mercer walked calmly through the station corridors, fully aware that the most powerful move he had made was the one no one applauded. At first, the interstellar Concord treated them as small technical problems. Committees blamed scheduling conflicts. Analysts blamed incompatible data formats. Translators blamed subtle cultural gaps that needed more time. All of these explanations were true, but none of them explained why the same problems had not existed only a few cycles earlier. Prince Kaler sat through meeting after meeting where progress slowed to a crawl. Conversations looped back on themselves. Old arguments returned with new wording. Decisions that once took hours now stretched into days. No one raised their voice. No one accused anyone else. But frustration grew. Kaler watched older diplomats struggle with something they clearly disliked admitting. They did not fully understand each other anymore. Species that had worked together for decades suddenly found themselves misreading intent, misjudging priorities, and misunderstanding consequences. During one long session, an elder from the Talarin Union finally spoke the uncomfortable truth. "We are missing the humans," she said quietly. The room fell silent. No one objected. She continued, choosing her words carefully. "They never led these discussions. They rarely took credit, but they listened. They translated not just language, but meaning. They noticed problems before we named them." Another delegate added, "They asked questions no one else thought to ask." Kaler felt heat rise under his skin. He remembered his words. Noise, impatience, short vision. He said nothing. Later that cycle, Kaler requested a private audience with Elias Mercer. The request was accepted. The meeting room was simple. No banners, no audience. Just a table, 2 seats, and a wide window showing stars sliding past the station. Elias arrived on time. He stood until Kaler gestured for him to sit. There was no tension in his posture, no pride, no fear. Kaler struggled to find the correct opening. He had been trained to command, to negotiate, to dominate conversations. None of those approaches felt right now. "You walked away," Kaler finally said. "Yes," Elias replied calmly. "Why?" Elias did not answer immediately. He looked out the window for a moment, then back at the young royal. "Because the conversation had already ended," he said. Kaler frowned. "You were insulted." Elias nodded slightly. "Yes, and you chose silence. Yes, Kaler leaned forward. In my culture, silence after insult is submission. In mine, Elias said, it is a decision. The words were not sharp. They were simple. That somehow made them heavier. Kaler felt something shift inside him. You understand, Kaler said slowly, that your withdrawal has caused complications. Yes, Elias said. That was intentional. Elias considered the question carefully. The outcome was expected. The intention was clarity. Clarity for whom? For us, Elias replied. And for you, Kaler sat back. You never demanded respect, Kaler said. You never argued for your importance. No, Elias agreed. Why? Because respect that must be demanded is unstable, Elias said. And importance that must be announced is usually temporary. Kaler had no response. The silence stretched, but it was different from before. Not empty, not awkward, full. I was wrong, Kaler said at last. The words tasted strange, but not bitter. Elias inclined his head slightly. Not in victory, not in forgiveness, just acknowledgement. I did not insult you because you were weak, Kaler continued. I insulted you because I did not see you. That happens, Elias said. Often, Kaler met his eyes. Will the humans return to full cooperation? Elias did not answer right away. Cooperation, he said carefully, is not automatic. It is chosen every day. Kaler nodded. What do you require? Elias smiled faintly. Nothing special, just partnership. The next assembly session began differently. Prince Kaler spoke early. He did not lecture, he did not perform, he acknowledged error. In my attempt to define strength, he said to the chamber, I confused visibility with value. That was my mistake. Whispers moved through the hall. I ask that humanity's role be recognized not by rank or title, Kaler continued, but by trust. The vote that followed was not dramatic. It was unanimous. Humanity's status within the conquered was elevated, not to rulers, not to enforcers, but to full partners. Advisors with authority, connectors with voice. The effects were immediate. Meetings regained rhythm, models aligned, negotiations regained flow. Problems did not vanish, but they became manageable again. No one applauded. Things simply worked. Elias Mercer returned to his quiet routine. He spoke when needed. He listened more often. He corrected gently. He connected patiently. Other species began copying human methods without fully realizing it. They asked more questions. They left space for silence. They learned to pause before reacting. Prince Kaler watched this from a distance. He learned something no tutor had ever taught him. Power did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walked away. And the galaxy followed. The change did not announce itself with ceremony. There were no celebrations, no speeches about unity, no grand declarations carved into crystal walls. The interstellar conquered simply continued its work, but now it moved with a steadiness that had been missing before. Conversations flowed. Disagreements ended with understanding instead of delay. Decisions felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. Humans did not take center seats. They did not demand special chambers or symbols. They sat where they always had, listened as they always had, and worked as they always had. The difference was that now people noticed. Elias Mercer felt it first in small ways. A pause before others spoke, waiting to see if he had something to add. A question asked with genuine curiosity instead of polite formality. A message sent not because it was required, but because his insight was trusted. He accepted all of it quietly. Prince Kaler watched from afar. The conquered had changed him as well. He spoke less. He listened more. When younger nobles praised him for his diplomatic wisdom, he felt a quiet discomfort, knowing how easily that wisdom had once failed him. One cycle after the vote, a new problem emerged. It did not arrive as a crisis. No alarms sounded. No systems failed. It began as uncertainty. Several outer systems reported conflicting long-term projections, not errors, differences. Each model was internally correct, yet impossible to align with the others. Trade routes that looked stable in one framework became risky in another. Energy plans that appeared sustainable from one cultural view failed under another. Committees formed. Analysts worked longer hours. Progress slowed. This time, however, the conquered did not panic. Instead, eyes turned naturally toward the humans. Elias was invited to a closed session with senior representatives from 6 major species, including Prince Kaler. The room was simple, designed for thinking rather than display. The air carried a sense of patience. Elias listened as each species explained their model. He asked gentle questions, not challenges, clarifications. Why does this outcome matter most to you? What assumption is this built on? What happens if that assumption changes? Slowly, the tension eased, not because the problem was solved, but because it was understood. Elias did not provide an answer. He helped them find one together. Over several cycles, the Conquered adopted a new working approach. Meetings became smaller, listening became structured. Silence was no longer treated as weakness or uncertainty, but as part of thinking. The humans did not teach this method formally. They modeled it. Others learned by watching. Prince Kaler found himself practicing silence deliberately. At first it felt uncomfortable, like standing still in a rushing current. But over time he began to notice things he had missed before. Patterns, emotional undercurrents. Moments when speaking would add nothing, and moments when one careful sentence could change everything. One evening, Kaler requested another meeting with Elias. This time it was not official. They walked along a viewing corridor where stars stretched endlessly in every direction. No guards followed. No aides waited nearby. I used to believe leadership meant being seen, Kaler said quietly. Elias nodded, waiting. Now I think it means being useful, Kaler continued. Even when no one notices. Elias smiled slightly. That is a hard lesson to learn young, Kaler laughed softly. I learned it late. They stopped near the window. Will humans ever lead the conquered? Kaler asked. Elias considered the question. Lead how? As rulers. As final decision makers. Elias shook his head. Unlikely. Why not? Because systems break when too much depends on one voice, Elias said. Humans learned that early. Kaler absorbed that in silence. Beyond the conquered, news traveled. Other alliances noticed how smoothly this one functioned. They noticed how conflicts resolved without pressure, how planning adapted instead of collapsing, how younger species thrived instead of being controlled. They asked questions. Some invited humans to observe. Others invited them to advise. Humanity did not rush. They chose carefully. Back on Earth, people followed the news with quiet pride, not with flags or marches, but with a growing sense that they belonged somewhere larger now. That their way of thinking had value beyond their own world. Elias received a message from home one day. It was short. Good work, don't forget to rest. He smiled. The conquered faced many challenges in the cycles that followed: economic shifts, cultural misunderstandings, environmental pressures. None of them vanished, but none of them overwhelmed the system either. Because now, when tension rose, someone would pause and ask, have we listened enough? And often, the answer changed everything. Prince Kaler eventually returned to his home system. He took what he had learned with him. His rule became quieter, less dramatic, more stable. His people prospered in ways they did not fully understand but deeply appreciated. Years later, when asked about the moment that shaped his leadership, he did not speak of victories or debates. He spoke of a human who walked away. Elias Mercer remained at the Conquered for many years. He never became famous. He never sought recognition. When his term ended, he left without ceremony, just as he had once left the hall without words. The Conquered continued. Humanity remained, not loud, not dominant, but essential. And in a galaxy full of voices, that turned out to be the most powerful place to stand. The Conquered did not stay quiet forever. Balance never does. Several cycles after Elias Mercer left his post, new delegates arrived from beyond the mapped regions. They came from systems that had grown without conquered guidance, without shared rules, without patient coordination. Their civilizations were not hostile, but they were sharp-edged, shaped by competition instead of cooperation. They spoke clearly, quickly, loudly. At first, the Conquered welcomed them with care. Observers were assigned. Advisors listened. Humans were present again, though fewer than before, their role now shared with others who had learned from them. But the new delegates were impatient. They questioned the slow pace of discussion. They mocked long silences. They pushed for fast agreements and simple answers. One of them, a tall delegate named Res Tal, spoke openly during a session. You spend too much time thinking, he said. The galaxy moves faster than this. Action creates clarity. The chamber shifted uneasily. Some older delegates glanced toward the humans. The humans did not react. They listened. The delays returned, but this time for a different reason, not confusion, but pressure. The new species wanted results now. They pushed systems before they were ready. They rushed alignment before understanding. Small problems appeared, not failures, friction. Prince Kaler, now older and calmer, watched the pattern form. He recognized it immediately. He requested a session with the human delegation. "This feels familiar," he said. "Yes," a human advisor replied. "It does." "Will you walk away again?" Kaler asked. The advisor shook her head. "Not this time." The conquered chose a different approach. Instead of pulling back, the humans leaned in, but quietly. They did not argue against speed. They did not criticize impatience. They simply began asking questions in public sessions. Simple ones. What happens after this decision? Who maintains this agreement in 10 cycles? What assumptions are we making about trust? At first, the new delegates answered confidently, then less so. Then they began pausing. Silence returned to the room, but now it was shared. Restal grew frustrated. "You slow everything down," he accused during one meeting. "You hide behind questions." A human advisor met his gaze calmly. "Questions reveal shape, speed hides it." Some delegates nodded, others frowned. The tension built, but no one raised their voice. No threats were made. The conflict stayed where it belonged, in thought. Over time, results spoke louder than arguments. Projects guided by patient coordination lasted. Those rushed ahead stumbled and had to be rebuilt, not destroyed, just redone at cost of time and trust. The new species noticed. One by one, their delegates began sitting longer before speaking, listening more closely, asking for human input not as authority but as reference. Restal resisted longest, until a major initiative he championed failed to gain support across cultures. Not because it was wrong, but because it did not fit. He requested a private meeting with a human advisor. "I don't understand," he said honestly. "The idea is sound." "It is," the human replied. "For you," Restal frowned. "Isn't that enough?" The human shook her head gently. "Not here." The words landed softly but deeply. The conquered did not change overnight. It never did, but its center held. Years passed. The galaxy grew more complex. More voices joined. More systems overlapped. The need for coordination grew heavier, not lighter. Humans continued to do what they always had. They connected. They trained others without calling it teaching. They shaped systems without owning them. They influenced outcomes without controlling them. Back on Earth, children learned about the conquered in school. Not as a place of power, but as a place of listening. Young people grew up knowing that humanity's greatest strength was not force, speed, or even intelligence. It was restraint. Prince Kaler eventually retired from leadership. On his final day, he stood alone in the great hall where everything had begun. The flags floated quietly. The human flag was still small, still plain, but no one missed it anymore. Kaler smiled. Far beyond the conquered, new civilizations would rise, some would push. Some would rush, some would shout. And somewhere among them, humans would be there, listening, asking, connecting. Not because they ruled the galaxy, but because the galaxy worked better when they stayed.